It is official. DLSS 4.5 has been released. I'll show you how to download and use it right now because you do need to opt into the beta branch until it officially releases on January 13th. But everybody can get access to it, and it does work on RTX 20, 30, 40, and 50 series GPUs, so all RTX GPUs. However, as I'll talk about in a minute, the 20 and 30 series users might not actually want to use it despite its image quality gains. Let me pause this for a second because I'm a little bit worried that despite me zooming in 2x and slowing this to 50% speed, that it's gonna get killed by YouTube compression, because a lot of the advantages here are in extremely fine details. For example, when I look at the cross on this character and the cross on this character, this is noticeably sharper to me in person. Again, I'm not sure how much YouTube compression is going to destroy this, but I can promise that in person, looking at it native on the display, I can absolutely tell that everything's just a little bit sharper. There seems to be a little bit less ghosting. There seems to be particle effects less destroyed by the DLSS upscale. Now, currently we're looking at 4K using DLSS performance mode, and I've locked it to a 60 FPS capture, although I'm slowing the footage down here to 30 frames per second. Now, if you're noticing any judder or anything like that, that can just be capturing issues. Again, I'm slowing this down quite a bit and then capturing it again. So just the idea here is that DLSS 4.5 overall looks a lot better. Now, DLSS 4 already looked pretty good with its previous transformer model, and also in this video I'm going to be referencing presets for DLSS based on a letter. Now, if you've never used Nvidia's DLSS override feature in the app, that may be a little bit confusing to you. So the old version of DLSS transformer model was preset K, and there was also a preset J that was sometimes preferable, sometimes not. They had some trade-offs between ghosting and flicker. The newest version is preset M, although there's also a preset L, which is even heavier to use and is designed specifically for using ultra performance mode, which I'm not focused on in this video. But overall, everything just looks a little bit better in my testing so far, although my testing so far has been limited to Cyberpunk, so it would be interesting to see how it looks in other games. However, you, again, might not want to use it on all GPUs. When I tested on my 2060, I actually saw worse performance than native and significantly worse than the older version. But before we continue on with that discussion, how do you enable this stuff anyway? So you need to go into your Nvidia app, and you need to go to the Settings tab and then click on the About tab. Within that, there is the Early Access menu where you can opt in to access beta or experimental features. Now, this is only required if you're watching this video before January 13th, which is has been stated as the official release date, but you don't need to do anything crazy. You just go to Settings, About, and opt in. Now, to enable it in games, you can either do it game by game, or it might be easiest to just go to Global Settings. So again, what I clicked on here is Graphics, and then I clicked on Global Settings. Then within this, what you're going to see is there is the DLSS override model presets. What this lets you do is change the version of DLSS upscaling that you're using. Now, when you click on this, you get a menu with a few options. And I used to always just set it to latest, but that might not be what you want to do anymore if you're on a 20 or 30 series GPU. So this is important information, because if you go to latest, it's now going to use preset M, which is the new second generation transformer model from their latest development. However, if you go to custom, you can manually select the version that you're going to use. And I want to be clear that right now we're talking about DLSS upscaling, not frame generation. Nvidia has also announced a 6x dynamic frame generation mode, but that is not publicly released yet, and that's not something I'm talking about in this video. Also, that will be a 50 series exclusive feature, whereas the upscaling improvements are available for all 20, 30, 40, and 50 series GPUs. Now, again, if you go to the model presets, you now have options like A, B, C, D, E, F, J, K, L, and M. Now, to be clear, once again, Preset K is the DLSS 4 transformer model that most people have been using. Preset J is also that transformer model, but there's some trade-offs between these, between ghosting and flicker. So sometimes people would use one over the other, but if you just set it to latest, it would generally be preset K, up until now. Now we've introduced presets L and M. These are the new DLSS 4.5. This is the second generation transformer model. L is specifically designed to be used in ultra performance mode upscaling, not for quality balanced or performance mode. And it's much heavier, meaning you get less performance gain. But I think because of that, you can get a little bit more image quality out of it when you're doing those aggressive upscales. Preset M is going to be the main new version for your DLSS quality, your DLAA, your DLSS performance, balanced modes, etc. And if you set everything to latest, that's what it's going to use. But as I'm showing in my testing, it's not always going to be better performance. In fact, it's always less performance than you got from preset K. On newer GPUs, the performance hit is so minor that it's worth the increased image quality. On older GPUs, like my 2060 here, I'm getting worse performance than just running native TAA, and significantly lower than using preset K. Now, the other thing I want to mention is if you're not sure if you've enabled it properly, here's another thing you can check. So when you're running a game, if you press the hotkey Alt and Z, press Alt and Z at the same time, it opens up your Nvidia overlay, assuming you have the overlay enabled. Now, from here, you can go to the Statistics tab, and this allows you to monitor certain things, like your frame rate, your GPU utilization, etc. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom section, there's a Features tab, and you can check the mark for Super Resolution Model Override. When you click it and turn it on, or when you turn on your NVIDIA performance metrics, Alt-R is the hotkey for that, you'll now get this tab, SR Override. Right now it's showing inactive, because I'm not actually in the game. I noticed in the menu in Cyberpunk, it wouldn't show it as active, but once you're actually in the game, it'll tell you if it's active. But it won't just say active, it'll actually tell you which preset you're using. So you can see if you're using preset K or preset M. So this is all useful stuff. Anyway, though, let's get back into the performance metrics. So on my RTX 2060, and by the way, when I show the footage right now, if you're seeing screen tearing, kind of ignore that from an image quality standpoint. When I was showing you the initial, when we were focused on not performance, but on image quality, I had it VSync locked to 60 FPS so that my capture at 60 FPS lines up with the game's output. However, because I'm looking at performance right now rather than image quality, the capture is no longer locked to the same frame rate that the game is outputting, which causes screen tearing. Now, you would not see that on a variable refresh rate like G-Sync or FreeSync display, but for capture purposes, that does show up in a 60 FPS locked YouTube capture, if that makes sense. But again, I tested it out on the weakest RTX GPU available to see if it was able to handle this. And again, native TAA, I have running here at 60 FPS average in the Cyberpunk benchmark. Using preset K, and this is 1080p Ultra, so we're at 1080p now, and I'm using quality level upscaling. So this is DLSS quality on a 1080p output with the Ultra graphics preset in Cyberpunk. No ray tracing or anything like that. Now, preset K, the older transformer model, boosted my frame rate by 20% to 72 FPS, whereas the newer preset M actually lost me frame rate. I am now averaging only 56 frames per second, which is 93% of the performance we got at native. So I've actually lost 7% of performance by turning on DLSS. So clearly in this case, it's not really worth using. Now, I didn't test out if I went down to like performance mode upscaling, if I would get a boost over native. I think I would, but then you're starting to get less image quality improvements. Now, I also tested out a 30 series GPU, and this time I stepped it up a little bit. So we're looking at the 3060 Ti. Also, though, I went a little more aggressive on resolution. This is 1440p. But at 1440p, when I'm using DLSS, I usually use the balanced preset, so I tested that out here. So native TAA, I was getting 55 FPS at 1440p Ultra. So notice on the 2060 I was testing 1080p, on the 3060 Ti I'm testing 1440p, still at the Ultra settings though. Native, I'm getting 55 FPS here. Using DLSS balanced, using the older preset K, the older transformer model, it boosted me from 55 FPS to 77 FPS, which is 40% performance increase over native. Whereas now, using DLSS balanced using the preset M, I'm only getting 62 frames per second. Now that is an improvement over native, but only by 13%. So here, again, I'm using higher resolution, but also a more aggressive setting, the balanced setting. So here we are getting performance boost over native, but significantly less than the older transformer model. So on the 30 series GPUs, it might be questionable whether this is worth using. Now, the 40 and 50 series GPUs don't really have any issues running this, although it's not quite as performant as the older preset. Now here I don't have the native resolution test because honestly, I actually started testing the 50 series and 40 series GPUs when I set out to test this, and it wasn't until I got to the 30 and 20 series GPUs where I noticed how bad the performance was, and I actually just wanted to double check whether it was even faster than native, whether we're gaining any performance at all. So on the 4060 Ti, where I'm using the 16 gigabyte version here, I'm again running 1440p Ultra, so the same thing we were running on the 3060 Ti. And DLSS balanced on preset K, the older transformer model, is hitting 86 frames per second. And the newer preset M, the second gen transformer model, is hitting 80 frames per second. That's reaching 93% of the performance of the older transformer model, but even though I didn't run it here, it's definitely faster than native. It's just less of a performance boost. So I think it's worth using on the 40 series GPUs. Then I just decided, okay, for 50 series, let's just go all out. Let's test out the 5090. And here I went up to 4K resolution though. It's still ultra, not using any ray tracing, just the standard ultra preset. And here we're looking at the older transformer model, preset K, but I'm in DLSS performance mode here. So we're looking at 4K DLSS performance, and the older transformer model, preset K, is hitting 176 FPS, and the newer second gen transformer model, that's preset M, is hitting 167 FPS. That's reaching 95% of the performance of the older transformer model. So here, again, dropping from 176 FPS to 167, I think is completely worth the improvement to the image quality. So it's looking like, based on my testing, on the 50 series and the 40 series cards, it's kind of a no-brainer to use it. It's a slight loss to the performance compared to the older transformer model, but still much better than native, and it's significantly better image quality, at least in certain situations and in the testing I've been able to do so far. So I would like to get additional, testing on the image quality and such, but like I said, I don't know how much comes through the YouTube compression and capturing artifacts, etc., because you lose something in capture, you lose something when you're editing it and like showing it in this video as well, and then there's the YouTube compression. But in general, to me, just everything looks a little bit sharper than it did before, and I see a little bit less ghosting and a little bit like better particles and things like that. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that this is expected behavior. The low performance on the 20 and 30 series GPUs is completely expected. I'll link this source in the video description, but if you go to GitHub, you can actually find NVIDIA's official programming guide for DLSS. And in their programming guides, and they've done this for all the versions of DLSS, they actually explain how much performance cost there is to run these DLSS models. They also explain how much VRAM it uses, which is kind of interesting as well. So what we'll notice here, now they're just in this table chunking the 50 and 40 series and the 30 and 20 series here. This table is talking about VRAM usage. So one thing to keep in mind here is that the newer model does use noticeably more VRAM, but that hit is more noticeable on the 30 and 20 series GPUs. They actually require more VRAM to run the model than the 50 and 40 series GPUs do. Now, why would that be the case? Why is this so much heavier on the 20 and 30 series GPUs, not just in performance, but also in VRAM capacity? Now, I think that's explained by the fact that this is FP8 accelerated. So this is NVIDIA's official slide deck for their announcement of DLSS 4.5. And if you look right here, they mention that it takes 5 times the compute compared to the previous model, and that it's FP8 accelerated. Now, so the thing is that the RTX 20 and 30 series GPUs don't have FP8 acceleration natively, to my understanding. My understanding is that this is having to run on FP16 on the 20 and 30 series GPUs through some sort of translation or emulation or something like that. Now, again, I'm not an expert on machine learning and FP8 and FP16 and how you go about that, but in general, the idea here is the 20 and 30 series GPUs are having to run something that's designed for FP8 without the hardware that is designed for FP8. That's why it's more costly like this. And again, they're mentioning that it's using 5 times the compute. So if we actually go back to the programming guide, we get a little additional information about this. So in addition to the increased VRAM usage compared to the older model, again, the older model being like the JK presets, and now we're looking at L and M, we can see the additional VRAM usage here, and that it's more even on the 40 and 50 series GPUs, but on the 20 and 30 series, it's a lot more. Like, if we go down here, this actually gives some performance cost metrics for individual graphics cards, and this is official information from NVIDIA, and unlike a marketing slide, this is actually their programming guide. So they're less incentivized to put things in the best possible light, make things look as flattering as possible, right? Marketing is essentially trying to get as close to lying as possible to make your thing look as good as possible while still being technically correct, whereas a programming guide, you're more able to kind of trust things at kind of face value. And this also, again, lines up with my testing. Now, notice that their performance metrics they're giving here are in milliseconds, not frames per second. And that makes sense because really what's going on here, when you are getting a performance gain out of using DLSS, like where does that performance gain come from? So if I just jump over here to like the 3060 Ti and we look at, why is using DLSS faster than native resolution? So the way that upscaling increases your frame rate is basically you're running the game at a lower internal rendering resolution, which is faster to compute. So when gamers are used to looking at frames per second, what that's really talking about is how many milliseconds it takes to compute a frame. And then they just extrapolate how many frames you could run in a second based on that. So it's really how long does it take to compute a frame? That's what we're thinking about here. So by decreasing the internal rendering resolution, you can render the frame quicker. It takes fewer milliseconds to render a frame, so you can render more frames per second. Except when we're upscaling, it's more complicated than that. You're not just running the game at a lower resolution, you are internally, but then you are applying an upscaling algorithm which takes some number of milliseconds to compute. And the performance gain that you get is the difference between how much you gained by reducing the resolution and then how much you added back on by running the upscaling algorithm. The difference between those is your performance gain, which you can measure in milliseconds, but we can also look at in frames per second. So what we can see, like what's going on with the 3060 Ti here, is that the older preset, because it took fewer milliseconds to compute than the new one, the difference was greater, and it increased our frame rate more. That's what's going on here. So when we look at this programming guide, what it's showing here is the number of milliseconds it takes to apply the upscaling algorithm And remember, so if you decrease the internal rendering resolution, you gain some performance, but then you apply the upscaling algorithm, you lose some performance. And that's what we're looking at here. So when we look at a card like the 2080 Ti, which is the only 20 series GPU I'm seeing them publish information about, and that's the most powerful 20 series card, so that's maybe a little bit concerning here. And remember, I saw pretty bad results on the 2060, which is a lot less powerful than a 2080 Ti. What we're seeing is the older transformer model, if we're looking at 1080p resolution, took 1.16 milliseconds to apply. At 1440p, it took 1.8 milliseconds to apply. At 4K, it took 3.5 milliseconds to apply. Whereas if we look at preset M, at 1080p, we're jumping from 1.16 milliseconds to 1.95 milliseconds. That's the fairly significant increase because we're going from about 1 millisecond to about 2 milliseconds. Now, and that's on the 2080 Ti. Remember, if I was testing out like the 2060, things could be worse, right? Now, if you go up in resolution, like 1440p, 1.88 milliseconds increases to 3.41 milliseconds, and at 4K, we increase from 3.5 milliseconds to 7.5 milliseconds. So you can see how much heavier the new model is. Now, preset L, which I didn't test in the video, again, it's designed for ultra performance upscaling. You can see that this is actually significantly more costly than even preset M. So that's probably just a don't use preset L on any 20 series GPU for whatever reason. It's just not going to be worth it. Again, 30 series GPUs are like the 3060 they're showing here, are also showing that significant increase to the milliseconds going from preset K to preset M. And again, preset L, definitely stay away. And while the more powerful 30 series GPUs are more powerful and they can overall compute things more quickly, like if we jump from the 3060 to the 3070, you can see it just in general computes even preset K quicker. It goes from 1.45 milliseconds to 0.93 milliseconds. And then the preset M goes from 2.81 milliseconds to 1.74 milliseconds, right? So it's still more costly than preset K was, but the more powerful GPUs do run it quicker. So what I'm trying to get at here is if you're on a more powerful 30 series GPU, it still might be worth taking a look at preset M just to kind of see how it goes. But again, it is still a pretty significant hit compared to the older preset K. Now, if we jump to the 40 series GPUs, like here we're looking at the 4070 Ti, notice how much better they run the new model because they have that native FP8 and they're just more powerful at this AI compute. So they're way better at computing this. Notice that preset K goes from costs 0.56 milliseconds, whereas preset M costs 0.68 milliseconds. So we're only increasing by 0.1 milliseconds, well, 0.12 milliseconds if you want to be super precise. Whereas remember, if we're way back on the 2080 Ti, it's almost a full millisecond, right? I mean, it's like 0.8, right? But that is significantly more costly relative to what we're seeing on the 40 series GPU. And that's why this is happening, right? And then when we jump to a similar performance 50 series GPU, like the 5070, we can see that it can compute the preset K in 0.64 milliseconds and preset M in 0.75 milliseconds, right? So again, similarly, it's gaining about 0.1 milliseconds to compute, right? So anyway, that's the general idea. And again, this source will be linked in the video description. So on the 50 and 40 series GPUs, there's a slight performance hit, but it's very minor. And the trade-off we get is the better temporal stability, reduced ghosting, smoother edges. These are some of Nvidia's screenshots to kind of highlight this. So again, it's their marketing materials, but I showed you some of my own side-by-side capture to verify what we're seeing here. Here's them showing some reduced ghosting in Oblivion Remastered, where you can see that there's a little outline of the sword that was in motion in this direction. You can see a faint outline of it here and here and here, whereas in the 4.5 model, it's gone, right? Here we saw just generally sharper detail overall, and maybe even a slightly better specular response on the kind of reflection there. And again, they're even showing that improved anti-aliasing, things like on the chain link fencing here, just overall looking a little bit better with the newer model. So, what's the overall conclusion on the video? I can confirm NVIDIA's claims that image quality is improved, at least in Cyberpunk. I haven't had enough time to test out a bunch of games at this point. I can also confirm that on 40 and 50 series GPUs, this should be a no-brainer. Turn it on, you're getting better image quality. On the 20 and 30 series GPUs, I'm going to give NVIDIA credit for allowing them to use it. I think that is a good thing. And this is kind of the situation where AMD is in right now with FSR 4, which also is an FP8 based algorithm where their 9000 series GPUs can run it. And AMD has not officially allowed their older generation cards, like the 7000 series, to use their FSR 4 upscaling. Probably because it is significantly less performant. There's a leaked Int 8 version that AMD has leaked, whether it was intentional or not. They've leaked it, and we've shown that it works, but it's not super performant on the older generations. So that's the situation that NVIDIA was in here. They could have made this new preset M exclusive to the 40 and 50 series and not allowed the 20 and 30 series cards to run it at all because of the significant performance hit. However, I'm glad they didn't make it exclusive. I'm glad they let the 20 and 30 series users make the decision for themselves on whether or not to use it. But like I said, we can see the milliseconds in compute time here. It is significantly more compute time, and I've backed that up with my own testing, right? So my testing shows 20 and 30 series cards, if you got one of the more powerful ones and you're using a more aggressive upscaling like balanced or performance mode, might be worth using, but the older version gets you a lot more performance. I'd probably recommend not using it. 40 and 50 series cards, I'd recommend using it, and I can confirm some noticeable, image quality gains, sharper details on all the stuff, all of that. So that's what I've got for you guys today. Like I said, I can't test out the 6x dynamic frame gen. That's not officially released yet, and I'm not at CES in person where they have some booths and some people are testing that out. Hope all of you have an excellent day.